procedure, renewal of particular contracts that are self-explanatory, as well as grants, and a couple of small donations as well. So on consent, I want to ask my colleagues on items 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, item 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 consent, which means we would then hear items 1, 7, 8, and 11. Council members, do you wish to call any of those? No? Okay, so that'll be the order without objection. We'll go ahead and also adopt any related reports, CAO reports, or technical amendments with those.
Thank you.
Okay, then that'll be the order on that. With that, let's go ahead and open it up then for item 1.
Item 1, communication from the mayor and CAO report relative to budget modifications and contracting authorities for the United States Department of Homeland Security fiscal years 2010, 2011, and 2012 Urban Areas Security Initiative Grant Awards.
Great, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
And if you could, just walk us through this. This is a $5.5 million UASI grant reallocation.
Okay. Good morning, Mara Legaspi with the Office of the CAO. The Mayor's Office requests authority to modify the UASI 10, 11, and 12 grant awards in order to reappropriate money to fund the LAPD's radio platform upgrade project. The departments here if you have any specific project questions.
What's the total budget for this particular project? It says here that the project's a 3-phase project. Is this phase 3 or is this phase 1 or 2?
Councilmember, good morning. Commander Forrest Frank, Information Technology Bureau, LAPD. It's really not phases. They're really 3 distinct projects. They're 3 separate projects, and the one that we're talking about is relative to the first. It's Project 1. These are all standalone projects. None of them are interdependent on the other.
Oh, they're not. Okay, then can we correct the report for the record and say that they're standalone and separate and not phased? Because in the way that it's written, it could be interpreted by some to suggest that we're getting grant funding for phase 1, and then we're going to have to figure out phase 2 and 3 later, and then the system may or may not work without it, and so we run into those issues. So I'm glad you've pointed that out, because there's a huge difference for some folks that might be reading it differently. So we'll go ahead and correct the report before it comes to council if we could, and spell that out. And that answers all my questions. What we're doing is critically important, and I support the efforts and the radio platform upgrade makes sense. So that was more of a technical correction then. Okay, council members, any other suggestions?
No, move to approve.
Comment? Okay, we have a motion to move to approve, seconded. We'll go ahead and move it with that technical correction and send it to council. Thank you very much.
Your next item is item 7. Board of Police Commissioners report relative to the feasibility of implementing a Medina alert system in Los Angeles to issue alerts when a severe or fatal hit-and-run collision occurs and a vehicle description is available, and the steps necessary to implement such a system pursuant to motion Englander-Bonnen.
Great. Good morning. Thank you so much. Let me open this up, since this was, if I could, colleagues, on my motion on this. And I think it actually dovetails well into the partnership motion by my colleague on number 8, which we'll talk about as well. And it was, in fact, many of the questions I got is, first let's back this up. This is an epidemic. We have over 20,000 estimated hit and runs in the city of Los Angeles each and every year, last year alone. That is roughly a hit and run incident. And I will never call it an accident, because it is not an accident. It's a crime. In fact, it's one of the most cowardly things you could do, is to hit somebody and flee the scene, particularly if there's an injury or, God forbid, a fatality. and you leave somebody on the side of the road for death, like a wounded animal. And you shouldn't do that to animals either. So if we look at that, that's roughly every 26 minutes in the city of Los Angeles, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, there's a hit and run incident. There's a hit and run crime on the streets of the city of Los Angeles. This has gotten to a level where we need to affect change. We need the public's help. We can't do this alone. We don't have a uniformed officer on every single street, every single day, in every single neighborhood, watching for hit and run incidents. And we know that these crimes are occurring and there are witnesses that need to come forward. We know we need to share this information with the general public. The idea and the concept that we have the technology today, that we can get together, and I want to thank LAPD because they have been forward thinking and sharing, and I know we're going to go into the details on this in a moment, the ideas and the spirit behind not only this motion, but what we can do without the state's help. We're asking for the state's help in a yellow alert type system, similar to an amber alert, where we can post the information on their display boards, where we've got information on the vehicle, the description, the color, make, model, year perhaps, partial license plate, where we can push this out there. We also have technology such as social media, Twitter, Nixle, Facebook, all types of other programs that we can push this to the public. In addition, I think we've got to think outside the box. We've got to ask, number one, first and foremost, our own city employees, whether it's the Department of Transportation, whether it's our crossing guards, whether it's our sanitation workers, whether it's street services. We have thousands of city workers that are on the streets every day that may be able to help, that may see something and then they shall say something. We've got to work with our partners in-house. We also have to think outside the box and go to and utilize all the new technologies and companies that are emerging. First and foremost, starting with our licensed companies like taxis. We've got them everywhere. But then we've got to expand that and think about folks like Lyft and Uber, where we have drivers all over the city all the time. Push the information out to them. It's something that I encourage those technology companies to deploy to their drivers. But we also have things like Waze. As a Waze user myself, I think it's fascinating that when you stop and you're not driving or you're stopped in traffic and you are going 0 miles an hour, as the case is for me often and almost every day on my way to the city of Los Angeles or City Hall, you suddenly get a pop-up ad. Are you hungry? There's a restaurant nearby. Well, how about a pop-up ad? Have you seen this vehicle? A hit and run just occurred. There's no reason those technology companies can't be good corporate citizens and partners in fighting crime. And so we've got to use things that we have in our tool belt today, such as Nixle, such as our own social media. We need the public's help, is the bottom line. The other thing we should do is send out an alert to the body shops and let the body shops know that this is what we're looking for in their area. Year, make, model, color, description, license plate, partial plate. This is the type of damage, front end damage. If a vehicle comes into a body shop and there's front end damage with a broken windshield, and the windshield repair company comes out to replace it and there's hair in the windshield, there's a good chance they hit somebody and it was a hit and run. What we need to do is partner also, which we'll talk about in the next motion on item 8, and give the incentive to close this and make it full circle to get people not only to respond, but give them an incentive financially to do so, and we'll talk about that and have Joe go into the descriptions on that. I wanted to open it up because I've been giving this clearly a lot of thought. We need to do something, and I want to get your expert advice and input and suggestions on everything that I've sort of just rattled off and walk us through how we can accomplish some of these objectives. Good morning.
Good morning. That wasn't a rattle. You were spot on. Looking at technology, relationships, maintaining relationships, that's outstanding. That's what we're talking about. And starting with the relationships, you can see between DOT, LAPD, we're talking about MTA, all the other entities you just mentioned. Looking at that hit and run alert network, the ability of that first investigator to gather the evidence at a hit and run crime scene, to understand what that evidence means, and then compile it into a usable, be on the lookout message that is going out regionally. That is the phenomenal part that we need.
So once again, the other activation platforms, so if we do have an alert system, we're looking at obviously city entities. LAPD would notify communications. They would then reach out to the LPGs, the taxi cab companies, shuttles, MTA, as well as parking enforcement for DOT. Once again, for the transportation carrier networks, Uber, Lyft, airport passenger shuttles. We've had tentative discussions with Lyft. They seem very interested in helping us out on this. Uber, still waiting to hear back from Uber. Media, once again, Facebook, Twitter, Nixle, all the things you had mentioned. Reaching out to the body shops, AAA, we've had tentative discussions with their tow truck drivers. They would notify tow truck drivers, as well as AAA garage services licensed mechanic shops. So I think that's another way to get into those auto body shops. Yeah. It's definitely doable. I mean, we think we could probably push this out very quick. Once again, this proposal was, we were waiting for the Gatto bill up in Sacramento,
right.
Obviously, so that's where we're at now. We are going to start pushing it through the city and the county to see what our results are. So
excellent.
I think very, very doable.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Tom Drischler, Department of Transportation. Taxi industry is good to go on this project. We don't see any obstacles to setting up a system whereby we can get direct communications to the cab companies that can put instantaneous communications to 2,360 cabs throughout the city on the mobile data terminals in each cab. So we'll have 2,360 extra sets of eyes out there participating in this. But it also work the other way, where we can get them to be an eye out and be witnesses, and then also call into their dispatch and get right back to LAPD instantaneously when they see an incident out in the field. So we're confident that this will work from the taxi cab end of things.
Excellent. And we should probably add MTA and bus drivers, and they're on the list. Yeah. There's a letter from them right now. You're holding up. Excellent. It's essentially anybody who's out there, the general public as well as the professionals, and drivers that are out there as well. So I think we've captured that universe. I will say this: there are cities out there that are doing bits and pieces of all of these. There's not a city doing all of it. We'll be the first comprehensive program to attack this chronic plague, if you will, and go after them. And while we are the biggest city and remain number one in this category, it's our hope collectively to go after these and crack down and get off of that number one list on this. With that, I want to turn it over to my colleagues, but before I do, one of the issues that has been asked of me isn't that information overload? If we're sending this out all the time and every 26 minutes there's one of these incidents, isn't that information overload? Are people just going to ignore it? And I know that in reading the report and working closely with DOT and LAPD and all of the partners in this and that are involved in this, wanted to share with the general public and to my colleagues, that's not the idea. The idea is that they would be sent out in areas, and we can boil it down to a micro level of division. For example, many of the police divisions have their own Nixle outreach, their own sign-up list, their own opt-in list. Same thing with various Twitter accounts, things like that, where divisions may have their own. Many do. But we're also working where we can geographically send the information. So in other words, if there was an incident in San Pedro, people in West Hills wouldn't get it. It would stake to that particular location. But then it would also further take into account the particular incident and the nature of the incident, also the severity of the incident. Was there an injury? What type of injury? And so asking the departments to coordinate and come back with a plan on those specific levels of what would trigger the type of incident that would trigger the outreach. And so I wanted to address that as well. And go ahead and turn it over to my colleagues for input, questions, and statements as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your leadership on this. At the end of the day, what we want to do is change the mindset and the culture of our drivers here in the city of Los Angeles. And this item and the item we're going to hear next will do just that. So I just want to thank you for your leadership, and thanks to the department and the DOT for your collaborative efforts to help seek those changes, and really appreciate your help on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, very commendable, and thanks for your leadership on this very important issue. It's to think that so many people can be indifferent to the hit-and-run epidemic and seemingly immune to the suffering that it causes is a very depressing situation we're in. It kind of represents a breakdown in civilized society that we cannot just we ourselves cannot look the other way. So I'm glad that we're taking this action, and I want to thank you, gentlemen, for all your work here as well. At what point, when someone witnesses this type of crime, at what point does it cross the threshold of aiding and abetting? Does it, or does it? Like if someone sees it, has all the information, and then they just kind of look the other way, and they themselves leave the scene, what point does that become a problem?
If I'm correct, and hopefully the city attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, there is no crime to that.
Okay.
There's nothing attached to someone not reporting something, whether it's a hit and run, a robbery, a murder. There is no repercussions for not coming forward.
Very interesting. Okay. And another question is, so the initial attempt by Gatto was vetoed by the governor. It's been reintroduced. Is that right? Correct? Yeah. And what do we think its chances are of?
From what I'm hearing, and I was in Sacramento on Tuesday talking to some folks as well, is that the veto message on that and many of the other bills was, we're not opposed to that. It's probably a good thing. This is coming from the governor, and in fact, both the speaker and the pro tem shared this with me on some of the veto bills that were done. It was there's a price tag to everything. So if you find it in the budget or you calculate what the cost is, I'm willing to sign it. And so they're taking a different approach going into this year. There were some tax credit elements that they prioritized last year that the governor did with film tax credits and other things. So this year, the message was, come in with ideas, great, particularly life-saving, good public safety initiatives, but show me some money to go along with it or identify that in the budget process. So it was a positive message that there would be support for it this year.
Okay. Well, I wholeheartedly support this effort, and I feel that we must do something that will encourage people to appeal to their better selves and speak up and speak out. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what we'll do with this is we're going to go ahead and direct LAPD then to work and develop the hit-and-run notification criteria, and that was what we were speaking to, and what would they actually send out and what types of specific incidents. Direct EMD and LAPD to incorporate hit-and-run notifications to the Notify LA mass notification system. That's Nixle and other platforms and social media. Direct DOT to work with our taxi drivers, Metro, Uber, Lyft, et cetera, that we talked about here as well, and to include their dispatch systems. Direct the EMD to include all city departments, including proprietaries, through early warning notification annex, which we have up and running, and the direct EMD to work with LAPD to develop outreach strategies, and also to work with the council offices in any way we can help, and report back in 90 days with the progress of the pilot program to the full city council. So we're going to go ahead and send this on to city council, not hold this in committee. It's very timely and critical, and again, with every 26 minutes, there is a hit and run crime in the city of Los Angeles. So we want to move on this right away, and we can't thank you enough for your cooperation, participation, and strategy, your expertise you've brought to the table, professionalism, and willing to incorporate a lot of these ideas and initiatives on top of everything else you're doing and making this a priority. We truly appreciate that. Thank all of you very much. That'll be the order without objection, and we'll go ahead, and if you want to stay there as well, I want to turn it over to Councilmember Buscaino on item 8.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, these two items really reflect each other in finding a way to address the high number of hit-and-run crimes in the city of Los Angeles. You know, in a time where the city is trying to promote walkable and livable streets, we need to take these types of actions to ensure our residents that it is safe to walk on the street without having the fear of getting hit by a car. The number of hit and runs in the city of Los Angeles is clearly unacceptable. We need to do everything we can do to change the culture of driver apathy in Los Angeles, where motorists continue to display a lack of responsibility, concern, in some cases leaving a fellow human out in the street to die. And this proposal before us for a standing reward will fit well with the local Medina alert system that we just heard in the previous item. And thanks, Mitch, for your efforts and leadership on that, and also the statewide alert system, as Mr. O'Farrell mentioned, by Assemblymember Mike Gatto. These are all great steps as we move forward. I worked West Traffic Division with LAPD for a year and a half, 2 years, and one of the worst incidents that I had to respond to was a hit-and-run crime involving not only property but also lives. My intention here in this item is not to just increase the number of witnesses that come forward, but to begin to change the mindset of drivers, to change the culture, how we drive in the city of Los Angeles, so that fleeing the scene of an accident isn't even considered as a viable option. I do have a few questions as we move forward. I want to thank the department for responding to my motion. You guys all hit the points that we were looking for. One thing I didn't see any specific recommendation for council action contained in the report. If this committee and the city council wish to move forward, would instructing the city attorney to draft an ordinance be the next step? Right?
Correct.
Okay. Can you go into, I know in item 7 we spoke about the outreach with our partners in the media and MTA and DOT. Once this moves forward and the reward motion moves forward, what other mediums would you suggest besides billboards and social media and transit shelters or the general internet? Is there any other efforts that we can to promote this?
Looking at
PSAs?
Absolutely. Looking at the general media, what we look at is to go back
Phil, can you speak to the mic?
To go back to the scene and have a media release and have the family, the friends, the loved ones of the injured or deceased at that location. That's
the emotional appeal.
Yeah,
right?
that is definitely a compelling outreach, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And then, naturally, as we just talked about, there is nothing to compel a witness to come forward. Hopefully, this would be something that would make someone think, it is the right thing to do, and there is a reward. Reward system is well established in the city of Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to use the word entice a witness to come forward, then that's another tool.
Sure. And as for the application, the reward application, will it be prominently displayed on the LAPD website?
Oh, absolutely.
And where else can we put out the
as you said,
site?
the PSAs, we would talk to the neighborhood councils.
Mm-hmm.
We would look at our senior lead officers in each of the geographic areas to do community outreach, especially in that area of the occurrence. Looking at the totality, the full spectrum approach for the community outreach is really what counts, because that's our intended delivery. And so, community councils, neighborhood watch. So we drill down to really the person on the corner, if you will.
And the 15% you projected, the department had projected a 15% increase in cases filed. How do we come up with that number?
It was an estimate, merely an estimate that we projected.
And it's possible that this, do we know if it is possible that this program will deter crime and save the city money at the same time? I mean, we're saying, even though there would be, as your report states, a potential $5.5 million increase in rewards given out, are the potential savings in other costs such as emergency response, investigation, and prosecution that will result from fewer crimes being committed?
We have to think that way.
Right.
I want to be in the most positive light. And when we are successful, when we do have that reluctant witness come forward, we need to celebrate that.
Right.
We need to show that community support and that it is okay to come forward and provide information, because this hit and run, it has to stop.
And I appreciate the department making this a priority in reducing these types of crimes. And I know in 2014 the commission adopted the efforts in reducing hit and run crimes in the city of Los Angeles. I'm happy to hear the efforts continue. If we can offer rewards for illegal dumping, this is the least we can do for our residents when it impacts lives. And I like the fact how you guys broke it down, property damage only all the way up to fatality. So I appreciate your efforts, and I ask that we move forward on this. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yes. And no, I want to thank you, Joe, as well on this. In 2013, we had 323 injuries. Of those 323, 19 people were killed. 19 people were killed. 72 severely injured, critically injured out of those 323. I don't know if we have recent stats from 2014 or 15 or 2014 yet for those.
We have as of December 27th, 2014. We're hit and run fatals?
Yeah.
So we're 27, hit and run severe 144. And that's as of December 27th.
27 lives.
So it's gone up in one calendar year, and that's short of a week, from 19 fatals, 19 people killed with hit and runs in 2013 to 27 in 2014. 72 severely and critically injured in 2013 to 144 the following year. I have to believe that if we put a standing reward motion coupled with sending the information out to the public, we're going to crack down on these.
Sure.
I can't even fathom the fact that there are that many injuries and deaths, and the number keeps growing. I've got to believe that there are people out there that see something and just don't report it. I believe standing rewards make sense in this case because we need help. We need the partnership with the public. And we've done it for graffiti abatement. Graffiti. And we pay out graffiti rewards all the time, and it helps. We are not asking people to take this matter into their hands. We're not asking people to chase these suspects down. We are asking them to stop and render aid. We are asking them to call 911. We are asking them to call us if they see something with information, to call LAPD, to give the information. If the information leads to the apprehension and conviction, in one of those cases, in the fatality, the person would get a $50,000 reward. If there's a serious injury, it's proposed in this response that they would get a $25,000 reward. That's for a permanent or serious injury. If there's an injury that is not so serious, a $5,000 reward. I know there's been some contemplation, some discussion, some dialogue about no injuries, property damage only. What does that mean if the property damage is less than $1,000, or should we still give out a $1,000 reward? Every 26 minutes we've got a hit and run. I don't think it's up to the general public or us to figure out how bad. If they want to call something in or share information, what triggers a reward or what doesn't. I think we throw it all in there and see where it goes, because we've got to do something. So I'm all for the standing $1,000 reward as well. So with that,
I'd like to, if I can.
please.
I'd like to also measure our success when we draft these types of ordinances. So perhaps this time next year, we can look, actually he has to go through the process. I believe it still needs to go through budget and finance, right? After, and direct the city attorney to draft the ordinance, which things sometimes doesn't happen overnight around here. But I think once we have council approval of this ordinance, that I'd like to kind of look at our numbers a year and see if this has an impact or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a good idea. We'll go ahead and add that to it as well. But I want to put a sense of urgency on both of these, number 7 and 8.
Yes, thank you.
Send this to council immediately. Bring it back. I don't think we need to bring it back. Instruct the city attorney with this report to draft the ordinance. And just move this thing as quickly as possible. I mean, we know that if there were 144 people killed from these crimes last year, that's every other day. We don't have time to wait. So I think we move these forward immediately.
Committee members, item number 8 is also referred to the Budget and Finance Committee.
Yeah, and I think we send a message immediately to that committee.
I will.
To ask them to schedule it and agendize it and or waive it and get it to council as soon as possible.
Very good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate all your time and effort, and I know you got your hands full. Thank you. Okay, our final item is item 11.
Thanks for that. It's good work.
Item 11, motion Englander Krikorian instructing the fire department with the assistance of the CAO and the CLA to report with recommendations for implementing a false alarm fee that would provide for cost recovery of the resources associated with responding to recurring false alarms.
Morning.
Good morning, Councilmember. How are you, sir?
Good, how you doing?
Good, thank you. John Vidovich, Fire Marshal.
Yes.
Chief. Morning. Good morning.
Is it chief or marshal now? Can we just,
I know. Is it
can we call you
fire
chief marshal, fire marshal?
John.
John, okay. Fire Marshal John.
Before you is a motion that was introduced nearly 2.5 years ago. The department has had at least 3 reports come in front of the Fire Commission in various iterations. When Chief Terrazas promoted me to Fire Marshal, I was asked to take over and look at this project. Key commissioner is Commissioner Glazer, who I've been meeting with in regards to what the commission wants to see. So we have a draft board report that initially was supposed to go in front of commission this past week. However, when Chief Terrazas reviewed it, he recognized we need additional staff work in meeting our obligations to discuss the devil's in the details with the CLA and CAO. However, that being said, in conducting the research for the report, we recognize that in 2014, we had nearly 30,000 automatic alarms, water flows, bells, and smoke detectors. And we talk the term false alarm. Really, the definition of a false alarm by the code is a malicious alarm when someone pulls a pull station, as an example, and the department responds. Nationally, the term used is unwanted alarm. And when we use the term unwanted alarm, and you're going to see that language come before you, it's the alarm where a contractor is testing a system, doesn't notify the testing company, the department ultimately responds, and in essence, it's an unwanted alarm. With the propensity of these alarms, we see the opportunity to provide education to the owners and developers up front on this item. Additionally, as we look at our implementation plan, the Fire Commission is looking specifically to look initially at commercial buildings and apartment buildings, and not initially responding to single-family residents. Working with BOMA, we plan to establish a stakeholders group. We do have a draft proposed ordinance that will be coming before you. And the big shift, if you recall a few years ago when this initially came forward, there was a request within our budget for the department to monitor this, and we looked at the Cry Wolf program and so forth. But as we looked around jurisdictions and really across the states, there's private entities that could do this for us simply by extracting the data out of our CAD. They would monitor the amount of alarms at different addresses, and then when we hit the threshold for billing, we would bill, they would bill for us, and so forth. The key piece that currently we recognize is missing in our response is multiple times our fire companies respond to an address. We need to close the loop back to the Fire Prevention Bureau so we can be proactive and respond by simply writing a notice and indicating we've responded to this address 10 or 12 times in the last month, and it's the 12th floor and it's a duct detector. As we look at this, we've leveraged our relationship with Palantir to assist us to data mine this, and it's been enlightening. The highest response last year was to the Tom Bradley terminal at LAX, nearly 200 responses. And a lot of that was simply due to the construction and dust, and we can be proactive in working there. So I'm prepared to answer any additional questions. What we would like is an additional 90 days to bring a full report to your committee and Budget and Finance as well.
Okay. No, thank you for this. And as the author of this motion, and I've had a lot of conversations with the department over the last couple of years on this as well, looking at, first and foremost, addressing unwanted versus false. I think we need to flush that information out because there are false that are false that we should be billing for. There are, as an example, a alarm company that receives an alarm that goes off at a residence or at a commercial facility, and they know that it was triggered and how it was triggered. It could be a door that was opened, a window that blew open in the wind, whatever happens. And that alarm company then dispatches, instead of dispatching LAPD, they dispatch fire. They call 911. They suggest that an alarm went off at a residence or a business, and I've heard of this from folks in the field, that this is what occurs. And these alarm companies, because they don't want to upset their client, their customer, customers, people that have alarms in their business or their home that pay the monitoring service, they don't want to come home to their mailbox and find that the police responded and now they got a fine for it because it was a false alarm. Because they opened the door, the alarm company dispatched somebody, and they don't want to upset their client, their customer, and they know that the fire department doesn't charge anything, and they can get a full response. And so the alarm companies take advantage of that. They're ripping off the taxpayers, and it's wrong. That's number one. Number two is you've got these chronic issues, these repeat customers, if you will, offenders, many from incidents that FireStat is addressing. And I remember sitting in the first FireStat meeting, in fact, where we talked about the issues at Tom Bradley and how do we fix that. And we found out that some of the contractors that show up and the subcontractors move a wall, tear something down, they're installing something, and they trigger the alarm. And there wasn't a point of contact with every single sub that's doing all the work. And that communication and dialogue, just from FireStat and sitting down and looking at the numbers, has already helped tremendously from what I've heard and the feedback that I've gotten. But there are a lot of other locations that are triggering these as well. So I think we need to flush out unwanted versus false because there's some gray areas. I agree that not all false alarms are what you'd consider false alarm and how you define that. So I do appreciate you hanging a lantern on that, but I'd like to see some actual language on exactly how that spells out an unwanted alarm versus false. and the differences between the two when this comes back, if we could.
Yes, sir.
The idea of going after the commercial and apartments over the residential first, I'd like to see some of the numbers in what we're looking at. If LAPD is charging, and we've been doing it for years, I don't see any reason that we can't deploy both on unwanted alarms. We're talking about responding to thousands of these throughout the year, unwanted alarms, if you will. And many of these are going code 3 lights and sirens, taking the firefighters, first responders' lives at risk while they're driving through traffic at those rates of speed, and the general public. They're spending and exhausting critical tax resources, and they could be, and worse, they could be responding to a real emergency, and it's slowing down our response times citywide because they're responding to these false alarms. So I've really wanted to go after particularly these repeat offenders as much as possible in the interest of public safety and financial consequences to the city. So with that, I really appreciate that you've been working on this, and it's been very difficult because when we first started off, there was HIPAA issues, how do we bill, and what happens with schools, and all of these other things. Well, fire department has to respond, we don't have a choice, versus, how do we decipher this? It's similar, but it's very different than LAPD response. And I get that. I've really been educated over the last couple of years on a lot of those differences, and I want to thank you and the department for working so diligently on this, because it's incredibly complicated. It's not just as simple as it sounds, so I appreciate that. We'll go ahead and send this to the full city council and ask them to weigh on this as well, and bring the report back to the council, because I want to move this, if we could. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I remember when LAPD rolled this out. I was with the department then, and the rollout was pretty weak. And I know a lot of community members, residents were concerned about, how much this is going to cost me. What is the game plan for the fire department on reaching out to property owners, business owners, those who own all these huge commercial real estate? I just want them to be sure that they're folded in and advised and educated on the process.
Well, in our initial discussion of rolling out first to commercial buildings and to apartment buildings, establishing that stakeholders group with BOMA as an example,
Very
have
good.
a seat at the table, and then with the Apartments Association. If in fact, and when we go back and through the council members' request to look at single-family residents, obviously the outreach is going to have to be a lot more robust, reaching out to neighborhood councils,
Sure.
homeowner associations, and so forth.
Very good.
But in regards to the outreach, it's similar, quite frankly, how we had to roll out our brush program several years ago. The first time we billed, there was a lot of pushback. But, as the years progress and the education, we can't over-communicate on this issue. That's really what we're seeing.
Thanks, John. Thank you.
Real briefly, I think it's absolutely time to put some responsibility right back on the shoulders of the frequent violators. Having said that, so you say you cite an example of 12 times to one building because of perhaps their ductwork, and maybe that was just an example, but how many times you consider before the fine process begins? Has that structure been visualized yet?
And that's a great question, Councilmember. The devils are in the detail. I think collectively the department and the Board of Fire Commissioners want to do two things. We want to establish a pre-education component, and then the initial request was the first time you respond, similar to the LAPD, an online education component. But that second response, that would engage a charge. And, as an example, several years ago when I was in the field, Fire Station 3 downtown's nickname was the Bonaventure Boys. And when the Bonaventure first opened up, multiple false alarms. And when they finally engaged with the dialogue, it was a faulty detector that was placed, it was removed, and the responses subsided.
Yeah.
That occurs every day. We have proactive fire companies that recognize, we're going to a certain address several times, they contact us. But using technology, we want that to flag, when we hit a certain threshold, and we haven't decided what that threshold is, but it loops back into the Prevention Bureau, we dispatch an inspector, we educate, advocate, but you need to issue that citation or the notice of violation to ultimately have that corrected.
Yep.
Agreed. I think without threat of a financial penalty, businesses simply aren't going to be motivated to do anything about it. So I think this is a huge step in the right direction.
Well, thank you. Well, I think what we should do, actually, in listening to the conversation, is bring it back to committee rather than the council, because I know the commission and the department has things that they still have to vet and work out. But I don't want to wait another 3 months. I know that's the request. I'd like to get an update in 60 days, push it up a little bit, prioritize it a little bit. It's been a couple years, and even if it's not final, I'd like to get that update. So automatically, 60 days takes us to what date?
That would be your first meeting in March, which is a recess date, so March 27th would be the next available meeting.
Okay, then we'll have it scheduled for that agenda if
Okay.
we could, if that's okay. Just, give us an update. Hopefully, maybe we'll have things ready to go. And if we need to do it in phases, I'm okay with that. I just want to move forward on something. I look at these tens of millions of dollars, which is added up over the years to all of these responses, in money that should be going directly back into the fire department. And that's my hope. Is that we can start to utilize some of these cost-cutting measures that the general public or others are just taking advantage of, particularly, and when I say the chronic users that just don't care because there's no penalty, and going after these guys to say, you've got to stop rolling these resources out at this cost. And that money should go back into hiring more firefighters and having better technology. So I'm all for it in ways that I can do, then I can continue the fight to restore a great fire department. I want to thank you, Fire Marshal. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Council Member.
Without any other items on the agenda, that concludes the Public Safety Committee meeting, and we are adjourned. Thank you.